Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us for another day at the YSI Plenary. We are your YSI management team, coming to you live from the Lighthouse. We hope you had a great weekend, because the plenary is now well underway. We had thousands of people dialing in, and many working group meetings taking place. Thank you so much for joining the discussion. Not only did you talk about economics, you also met each other's pets, you learned how to make caipirinhas, you had pudding. We're so happy that you're with us today. And we've got another terrific schedule for you queued up, starting with another Questions Fair session.
Yeah, so now we're going back into the Questions Fair. Like you already were starting to get a little bit of the hang of it on Friday, and now we're starting up, and we're going to have Questions Fair sessions today and tomorrow. The Questions Fair it's a giant collaborative workshop for all the people of YSI, where we're going to try to come together and converge on a list of questions. We're going to discuss the questions for YSI. So while the speaker, we're looking forward to seeing Michael Spence in a second, is talking, we are inviting you to think about the upcoming questions, like the questions for YSI should be focusing on. And this is not just a Q&A, so don't think of it as necessarily questions for the speaker. Think of the speaker as giving us input to this process where we're collaborating on finding the best questions. Because after the session is done, this questions that we've suggested during the session will be uploaded into the questions graph that you can find on the website. And that will be a place where every other YSI participant can go in and find the questions and favorite the ones that they like. We realize that there's a lot to keep track of. That's why we prepared a short little video to show you how you can participate in the Question Fair sessions. So let's just see that one.
First, go to ysiplenary.org and click the night sky. This is the Questions Fair, where each star is a question, and each group of stars, or constellation, contains questions within a particular topic. You can find Questions Fair sessions in the schedule in the left sidebar and join them from there. Just enter the session and join the Zoom. As you listen to the speaker motivate their questions, think about which questions you believe to be pertinent for YSI. While the speaker talks, suggest your questions to your peers by entering them into the panel. This is not a Q&A. The questions are suggestions for research in YSI, not a question for the speaker to answer. Take a look at all the questions that were suggested and like the ones that you think are best. The questions moderator will select the most liked questions and present them to the speaker for a comment. These questions will be added to the constellation, where they can be further refined. Refine the questions by finding the best exact phrasing. Suggest a rephrasing yourself, or like the rephrasings that you think are good. After the session is over, you can find the submitted questions in the constellations. As a plenary participant, you can mark your 10 favorite questions in the graph. Just click the star in the corner of the questions card, and they will be added to your YSI profile. The most popular questions will make it into the final list.
And we're back in the Lighthouse. Let me quickly check. In the constellation, digital economy, Mylise, session moderator, check. Mike Spence, check. We're all ready to go. We're ready to beam up into the constellation. Let's go.
Centralized power, Big Papa, Big Data. If the net's a web, where's the spider? Big Data. Data as commodity and all-involving factor. A Cheshire cat you can't see as it constantly gets fatter. Some say data and some say data. If you signed up once, when you say see you later, you may feel like you've been leaving, but your information stays there. Your patterns of behavior have been saved within its tracer. But maybe there are ways that it's a cause for optimism. We're all at least connected in an integrated system. Our digital commodities are free of spatial limits, constituting translocational electronic ecosystems. But then again, who knows? And who composed it? Who controls it? And once the window's open, do we know if we can close it? When it glitches, are its fictions but a click away from truth? It recognizes you. Are you the user or the used? The digital economy. The digital economy. The digital.
Welcome to this question fair session. My name is Mads Vestergaard, and I'm the question moderator of this session. We are here to settle on the most pertinent 100 question in this current historical situation, to find our guides, to find our stars of navigation for navigating us through and on in this historical situation in time. We want to settle on the questions. And now we will just explain a little bit about how the system worked in the video just ran. So I don't want to get too much into those details. But I want to press the point that we are not trying to answer questions. We're trying to provide and incubate the best, most pertinent and inspiring questions. And this first part of the session will function as a collaborative question incubator. While our speaker, Michael Spencer, is talking, you will be invited to suggest new questions or like the questions, providing the support for questions suggested by others in relation to the talk. And this is an inspirational input talk to make us think about what the really interesting and inspiring questions are and should be. And when you see in the constellation of a digital economy where this session takes place, you will be able to see that we have 3 featured questions in there already. And those questions has been provided by our speaker, Michael Spencer, as inspirational questions. Some of the questions he thinks is really pertinent in the situation we're in now. The first of the questions is, will the China-US rivalry fundamentally change the way the world and the global system functions? And if so, with what consequences? That's one of the questions provided. Another one is why liberal democracies struggling to govern effectively, maintain political and social cohesion, and deal with major challenges under the heading of inclusiveness and sustainability. And the final one provided by our speaker is, how do we take advantage of the enormous potential of digital technology to advance human welfare in multi-dimensions while mitigating the many risks, vulnerabilities, and challenges that go along with operating on digital foundations? All right, here we have 3 questions provided by our speaker as inspiration, and take those as beacons for how to suggest new questions in this part of the session. The suggested question that receives most likes will be presented for our speaker for comments, not for answers, but for comments, and they will be registered and submitted to the question graph to our Galaxy as such, and have the opportunity to become a part of the 100 most favorite questions by our whole community. But we'll get to that in time. Now, and without further ado, I would like to hand over to Melis Arrero for presenting our speaker. Thank you.
Avaro, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session. Today, we are very happy to welcome our speaker, Andrew Michael Spence, in our constellation of the digital economy. Thank you very much for being here today. So Professor Spence is a retired professor of management and former dean at the Graduate School of Business in Stanford University. He served as the chairman of an independent commission on growth and development. And together with George Akerlof and Joseph Stiglitz, Professor Spence is a co-recipient of the 2001 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science for the analysis of markets and asymmetric information. And Professor Spence published a monograph in 2012 about the next convergence, the future of economic growth in a multi-speed world. Professor Spence, I'm now offering you the floor for 25 minutes to present us your thoughts on the important question for tomorrow. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melis, and thank you everybody for being here. I guess I'll try to be relatively brief. To be honest with you, there's no shortage of questions that desperately need answers right now, but I've never participated in what sounds like a competition to produce questions. So I think it's an interesting idea. So let me just say, make a couple of preliminary remarks. One of the things that attracted me to economics was the breadth of the field, everything from something pretty close to pure mathematics on one end to very applied empirical work and policy-oriented work on the other. And so, it's a place where lots of different kinds of people find homes and very stimulating lives doing research and teaching. Where I position myself in that is I still think of myself in terms of background anyway as an applied economic theorist. And by that I mean something relatively straightforward. There's quite a lot of us in this category. And that is that there are lots of things in the world that are A, complex, and B, difficult to understand. And the way we try to understand them in part is by developing theory and concepts and even sometimes models, that is fully logically internally consistent collections of concepts that allow us to focus on what's really important. So this is it's an art rather than a science, because when you build a model, you introduce constraints. You basically eliminate some of the things that are making it look like a fog rather than something clear, a system that you understand. But if you get it right, then it brings it into focus. I think of it as wearing glasses, and things come into focus. The other preliminary remark I guess I would make is that one of the things I think is terribly important is to distinguish normative from descriptive questions or research topics. I find they're both important, and they're both a significant part of the economics discipline, but they need to be kept separate. Where I find myself sometimes getting frustrated is when I'm reading something where there's a kind of unannounced switch back and forth between the normative on the one hand and the prescriptive on the other. And especially, I think it's dangerous to disguise normative discussions, under kind of a pseudo heading of descriptiveness. So one of your colleagues read the questions that I submitted. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on that, and I'm going to start with the third one, which is the digital transformation. So behind this, I guess I would say that most of the questions are things that really interest me. Have to do with sort of major transformations that are occurring in the world. I've written about one of them. In the post-war period, the global economy became an economy in which a much more inclusive economy in which not just what we call developed countries, but a very wide range of other countries experienced significant, development and economic growth. So that's a major transformation that's been underway for decades. But at this moment in time, it seems to me the transformations that either are or we hope are underway have to do, in my way of thinking, with the digital transformation and a whole set of questions related to that I'll get to in a minute. The sustainability challenge. We are in an age where many people believe that humans are the dominant influence on the way our natural systems work, and we are either at or dangerously close or even over what some people refer to as planetary boundaries. And finally, we're in a period where it looks like we're going to have a major reconstruction of the global system that we operated with for essentially the entire post-war period. And that's related to this China-U.S. tensions, but it's broader than that. So let me spend a little time on questions that interest me in respect to the digital economy. First, brief history. Many of you on this call are young, but so is the digital technology that we're using. The World Wide Web is about 30 years old and has been accessible to people for 25 years. So if you're under that age, it probably looks like it's been here forever, but it hasn't. And the mobile internet is about 15 years old. And we're on a path to sort of almost universal access to the internet via the mobile internet. And that is occurring at incredibly speed. And we are I believe, in the early stages of a major transformation in the way our economies are, and societies for that matter, are constructed and operate. So the questions that interest me, and it's one of the challenges in dealing with the digital thing is that it's having an impact in so many areas that it's just plain confusing. And so I think the only way to tackle that confusion is to sort of sort them out. So one major set of questions that has been posed, I'm not pretending any of these things are absolutely new, but so I'm kind of gauging them based on sort of importance and to some extent how challenging they are. So there's a set of questions having to do with automation, work, skills, and incomes. And those questions, I think, are best thought of in the era that I call pre-artificial intelligence and then post-artificial intelligence. That's a distinction that's often made in the literature, and it's a good one, because the post-current version of artificial intelligence is, among other things, dramatically expanded the scope of things that can be automated. You shouldn't think of that as whole jobs necessarily, but activities or things that people used to do. The scope of those things that can be automated or partially automated has expanded dramatically. I find the concept of substitutes and complements fairly interesting. And we're seeing discussions of both, but there's a set of questions about whether the major impact of digital technology on the world of work is going to be in the category of substitutes, meaning robots, automation, and so on, or complements, which means machines you work with that enhance your efficiency, effectiveness, the quality of the work that gets done, and so on. And they're probably both important, but I think we haven't sorted this through at all. One of the things you observe in the pandemic economy that we've lived in, coming up on a year now, is a very, very rapid acceleration in digital transformation. Again, this is in desperate need of empirical work to get it sort of precise. But the bottom line is, many people, practitioners, say that they've seen 5 years of adoption occur in 3 months. That kind of statement. So and that's coming from all over the planet. So I think you can count on that. We need more attention on the kind of what I call the cost characteristics of digital technologies, because if we're moving to a world in which digital is a variety of digital technologies taken together are the sort of a major part of the foundation on which the economy is built, then we need to understand the cost characteristics, because they affect a lot of things, like whether markets work, how much money people make, who owns the assets, and a whole lot of other things. And digital technologies tend, for the most part, as best I can tell, to have high fixed/development costs and relatively low to even negligible marginal costs. So software replicates easily. I think you've all heard of, non-rival goods. Data is a non-rival good. Knowledge is a non-rival good. These are things that when A passes whatever it is to be, then both of them have it. And so digital technologies have not unthought of characteristics, that is unthought of from before, but important characteristics that affect a lot of things. And I think we need to sort of, ask ourselves, do we really understand the sort of cost/investment process that produces these technologies? And then what are the implications for the way markets perform? There's a major set of questions that's currently an active subject of discussion, or actually it's an active subject of, evolving policy that has to do with market power. So I think almost everybody agrees that what I sometimes call and others call the mega platforms have an enormous amount of potential market power, and that power can be abused. This is a subject for competition policy, and these are sort of slightly unusual entities. They're sometimes called two-sided markets. It's a little hard to know what to do with a platform that's supplying services for essentially no cost, but they may be blocking access. So the critical point here is that these platforms have, once they get established, have staying power because of network effects and closing informational gaps and repeated game kind of properties, and they do control access for developers of new products, new services, new technologies, and that power can be abused. There's a huge set of questions that I think we're not wrestling with properly that have to do with data management, privacy, rights, data security. So kind of the first order of business, I think, is to understand, why data is so valuable, how it's used, and why. Let me put it this way, and why its value is related to our ability to share it. So one of the trends you see is that, we want, in pursuit of privacy, we're going to sort of establish that people own the data, that, meaning I own my data, even if Google has it. And I don't think that's probably going to get to where we need to get. What we need is, I think, a clear statement of rights and transparency and effective data management policies and regulation, because there's a trade-off here. I mean, data is an enormously powerful potential force for the good if used properly, but we're not very far down the road at thinking through. So how do we manage it in a way that we get the benefits and not the costs? That's an aspect of that question that I posed before. I've been very struck that the digital technologies, properly used, can be enormously powerful engines for generating inclusive growth patterns, and this is closely related to the data, to the data point. So, for example, we've known ever since the kind of internet became accessible to most of us that the one of the hallmarks of these technologies is that they're sort of kind of insensitive to distance and time gets compressed, and so if you're sort of talking with somebody on a digital platform like this, it doesn't really matter if one of us is in Italy and the other one's in Indonesia, and so on, and that has enormous potential for generating inclusive growth patterns. And so studies that have been done that I'm aware of in China, for example, where e-commerce and mobile payments and fintech is very highly developed and at a very rapid pace in the last 10 years, there's a very pronounced pattern of inclusiveness in the growth pattern. So regions that are relatively remote, third and fourth tier cities, seem to have a bigger impact. The entrepreneurs are on the ecosystems that surround the platforms are very low cost entry barriers. 50% of the entrepreneurs are women, and so on. So I think there's a whole set of questions around. Well, so how do we use these technologies, especially the platform centers, the ecosystems, to dramatically affect the inclusiveness of the growth patterns? There are a bunch of other things. One thing kind of worries me, and that is, if you look at public market valuations, especially in the United States, but more broadly, you discover that an increasing fraction of the market cap of these traded companies is associated with intangible assets. What that really means is the gap between the market value and and the depreciated value of the tangible assets is getting bigger and bigger. And that's true the more so for the high valuation companies, which tend to be highly correlated with the digital technology companies. And so we're creating large amounts of incremental value and wealth with these intangible assets, very prominently digital assets. We don't understand them very well. We don't really measure them very well. But what we do know is that we're creating those assets with relatively small numbers of people whose compensation is reflected in that value creation. And those assets are held in a fairly highly concentrated fashion. And so we have, in addition to the employment challenges that I mentioned before, I think we have a wealth distribution challenge that's associated with the outsized creation of value. This became dramatically apparent. I wrote briefly about this, a couple of months ago, in the pandemic economy, because the companies that were generating these big outsized intangible assets and related value actually outperformed during the pandemic economy, and a whole lot of other companies that generate in normal times value with a different combination of labor and intangible assets. I mean, things like hospitality, airlines, and so on. They were being hammered. And so this divergence just became very, very large and easy to see. Now, the magnitude of that divergence won't last forever because we will get through this. I think, I'm kind of near the end of what I wanted to say about this. There are other subjects. I mean, we see huge measurement challenges associated with the way our economies are operating. So free services don't show up. Even if we focus on incomes and material well-being for the moment, we have free services, and Eric Brynjolfsson and others are trying to estimate what's the magnitude of the consumer surplus that's being generated from these. We have a huge challenge that's not new, associated with quality improvements. I ask myself questions like, you can only do this if you're really fairly old, but back in the 1960s, we all got our first television sets, 50s and 60s. And we paid approximately, in kind of real terms then, a little bit more than we pay for television sets now. So if I put the television set my family first bought in, say, 1960 or 58 beside a modern television set and said, well, they cost the same, which one would you pick? There isn't anybody who would pick the 1950s black and white television. And yet, from the point of view of GDP, most of us are buying televisions. We were buying televisions back there. We had growth because more of us were buying televisions. Now we all buy televisions, once every 3 or 4 years, and they probably cost less. And all of the quality improvement that's gone with that has just escaped the traditional measurement system. So I think we have, just an enormous challenge in sort of really deciding what it is we want to measure. Do we really have a declining productivity trend? If so, in what dimensions? And finally, because we are entering a world of multidimensional measurement, I think, on the ground that, lots of people, ordinary people, scholars, wise people say, life is not just material well-being. It's a whole lot of other things that have to do with social cohesion, health, education, and so on. We really need multidimensional ways of thinking about that. But I'm very struck that the digital technologies are going to have a very big impact on a very large number of those dimensions, whichever ones one personally picks. There are many more questions. There's global supply chains and what they're going to look like, and why does digital technology seem to be in the early stages of changing them so much. But the question that I think really commands attention, if you're interested in kind of growth patterns and inclusiveness globally, is what are the digital technologies going to do to the growth potential of lower income countries? And think of lower income countries as countries that got started on sort of development and growth at a fairly late stage. And the issue is fairly easy to state, which is the normal non-resource rich country source of comparative advantage is relatively highly valuable and relatively low cost labor operating in the tradable sector in labor intensive manufacturing and assembly operations. And robots and digital technology are in the process of taking over in that area. And that has implications not only for the way global supply chains are put together, but it has enormous implications for whether or not there are other sources of comparative advantage, to use the economist term, that are equally powerful with respect to generating growth in the early stages of growth. This becomes less and less a problem as a country gets into high middle income status and starts to enable growth from domestic demand and move up sort of technologically driven value chains and so on. So that's a kind of, wild swing at some issues that I think I haven't tried to be comprehensive. I haven't talked about dual use technologies and national security, which is mucking up the kind of pure economic version of how we deal with digital technology. I mean, national security may not be a zero-sum game, but it's closer than most economic processes. And digital technology, including much digital technology, unlike the past that was developed mainly, for purposes other than military and national security purposes, has turned out to be important element of national security. And so that's, introduced a major element of complication in building or thinking about how global investment and trade and knowledge transfer occurs, because it changes the incentive structure in a major way. I think people know this, but they're not quite sure. We're not quite sure, what we're supposed to do about it. So why don't I stop there? I think that's probably enough from me at this point, and because I'd rather hear what you think are interesting questions, and maybe we can have a conversation.
Thank you very much for your very interesting and enlightening thoughts. I think we touched upon very key challenges for the economic question. You mentioned the challenge of automation, the understanding the new platform economies and the specific characteristics in terms of cost specificities, the big challenge of data management that's also linked to national security. It's a very important topic and big question. But we also touch upon the question of growth and international, both at a national level, with the issue of the challenge of wealth distribution, and also internationally with the issue of convergence. And I think that's a lot of very important questions. And so thank you very much again for touching upon all this and sharing your thoughts with us. So we will now move to the second part of this session. So we received some questions in the constellation from the participants. And so I will read them to you and offer you some time to reflect on whether you think these are relevant and important questions for future research in economics. So the question from participant number 1 reads, will automation increase unemployment or make it a meaningless problem?
Okay, so would you do one by one? That's an extreme. Go ahead.
Yeah.
It's up to you.
No, I will read it one by one and give you time to reflect question after question.
So I think that's an extreme.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, that's a very good question. And the honest answer is we don't know the answer, but we can probably make progress thinking about it. I don't think the question will become irrelevant. And if I were trying to frame it precisely in doing research, I would frame it as not where are we going to be 40 years from now when the digital transformation's over, but how are we going to manage through a transition, where we don't know exactly how it's going to go. And we have a lot of people who either need a new job or new skills or something like that, and try to dimensionalize that. But I think, the general question is, in many people's minds on an extremely short list of crucial ones.
Okay. Thank you very much. So question number 2 will read, how can digital advances contribute to our democratic process and the coherence of society? Very current question, I believe.
Or not contribute, I guess. I think that, I focused on sort of economic things mainly in my remarks, but this is a very important question, and it's obviously not strictly economics. The economic and social processes are being significantly impacted by the digital technologies, especially the social media. I think if we did a survey right now, people would say, well, most of the effects are sort of negative. I think that's probably a little biased. I think there's enormous value in the social media in terms of connectivity, and we've come to appreciate some of them, when we lost our mobility in the pandemic economy. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of research to do on the relationship between social media and media in general, and the way the digital economy functions on the one hand, and the way our society's put together on the other, including the political processes. One way to think about it, if one's going to do research on this, is look across countries and compare, how they think about that, but not only that, how they do about it, and what they do about it. So in the West, meaning Europe and North America mainly, our constitutions make it difficult to answer the question, what do you do with, unless it's extreme, what do you do with destructive internet content? If you go to some other countries, say China, for example, where the issue is the same, they have the view that you can have really destructive internet content, but they have an answer to the question, who's going to filter out the stuff you don't want? And that's the Chinese Communist Party. No, and I'm not picking or choosing the right one, and I imagine different societies will have different choices, but they're enormously big challenges, and to deal with them effectively, we need an expanded batch of research on what these impacts really are.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next question would be, how will digital and intangible assets be managed vis-a-vis national taxation policies?
So I think this is an extremely important question, and it has multiple dimensions. So Darren Asimoglu and others have proposed that our tax system is biased against labor and biased in favor of assets, and especially these intangible assets. And we need to pursue that discussion. And if it's right, and if we're tipping the balance against labor and employment on the one hand, and in favor of, let's call it automation or the substitution version of digital technology, that's probably not the direction we want to go. But then the big question, I think, that lies behind this question is the distributional one. There are a number of ways we can deal with the distributional one, but I think the first point to make is there's nothing I can think of, that works, that deals with it, quickly. And we've dug, depending on where you are, a pretty big hole with respect to adverse distributional trends that have been going on by most people's accounts, since the late 1970s, not all digitally related. And so I think, where we are is we've got to consider a whole range of taxes, ranging from, tax havens to taxing wealth to estate or, inheritance taxes to the way we sort of tax income and deliver services. And I don't think there's an accepted sort of right answer, even within the economics profession, let alone the sort of more ideological discussion that occurs outside. But I think, how to put it by way of summary, tax is not the only issue, but it's certainly one of the more powerful weapons that over time does really affect the distributional aspects of the evolution of the economy. And we probably, we need to do research, adding to the research that's already done, but we probably need to do something as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe an additional question will be, how can the digital economy be used to help sustainability and green growth?
Well, I think the answer, I think it not only can, but it will be used in multiple dimensions. So there's some really fairly good news, although on sustainability, I mean, we left it for long enough that we're in kind of behind the curve, to put it mildly. The global economy is producing about 36 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year, and we're supposed to be down around 14. So we're, 2 to 2.5 times where we need to be. And, at least a part of, the global economy is still growing fairly fast, and that growth will entail more energy consumption. So, if we're going to deal with this, we're going to have to do a great job on energy efficiency and lowering the carbon content of the energy mix. Now, the good news is that as compared with 10 years ago, when a bunch of us were looking at this, the green technologies, solar and wind particularly, have come down so dramatically in cost that you can imagine, with the right policies and international, investment schemes and programs and intermediation systems, you can imagine building a substantial fraction of the incremental energy requirements of a growing global economy with green technology. And a subset of that's digital, actually. Second, we're going to need smart grids, or that won't work. Third, we may work differently. Lots of people are saying now in the middle of this pandemic, that when we're over it, we won't stay off airplanes, but we probably won't get on them as often because we've learned how to use the digital technologies to, keep the travel down and so on. So, I mean, I actually, I think there's a very good chance that with the appropriate policy-oriented research, digital will turn out to be an important part of meeting the sustainability challenge.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question would be, how can the digital tools can help regulators to control the big tech companies?
Well, the standard pattern is that the regulators there are exceptions to this, but the regulators are sort of behind the curve, when it comes to sophisticated parts of the economy, like parts of finance or the digital sector. And that's probably true now. So I think the answer to that is, you on the regulatory side, you have to kind of get up to speed, and that doesn't happen overnight. And probably the best way to accomplish that is to have a more cooperative, arrangement between regulators on the one hand and various sectors on the other. And we tend to think of that as best done when it's very adversarial, but I actually don't think that's right. In part because of informational asymmetries, that I suspect that Google, Alibaba, Amazon, Facebook, Tencent know a whole lot more than anybody else about the way their ecosystems operate around their platforms. And we need that information in order to sort of regulate wisely. That is, not do damage where we might, but prevent damage where we can. And so I'm kind of, this is hope rather than forecast, but I'm hoping the move to ESG and aligning business models with important economic and social objectives on the one hand, and a sort of more flexible mindset on the regulatory and policy side, we might inch in the direction I'm talking about. But I really do believe that in very sophisticated, especially new technologies and sectors, that the notion that everybody knows what's going on and the regulators can just set the regulations properly is just unrealistic, because they know more than we do.
Thank you very much. I think we are slowly reaching the later part of the session, but I would like to ask you if you'd like to suggest any new question that you didn't get a chance to talk earlier for our audience.
Well, I think, let me spend a minute on, the kind of global economy. And so I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done here. And really top flight people like Danny Roderick are focused on these questions. So I think the starting point is, we had, in the post-war period for about 30 years, we had an increasingly open global economy that not only benefited a whole lot of people around the world once they found a way to take advantage of it. I'm thinking of developing countries, many of which we now think of as big and powerful, but were very poor at the start of that. And in addition, the growth patterns associated with that, including in the inclusiveness dimension, distributional dimension, were pretty benign. And I think we fell asleep and thought, well, just open the global economy and we're going to get benign, sustainable growth patterns, by letting markets, rip. And the last 30 years has taught us that that's just not true. That's not true domestic in most of our economies, and it's not true in the global economy. And so we're facing a world in which we have to, pay attention to complexity in a way that we, tried not to before. And that complexity comes all over the place. I mean, we know that there are distributional consequences, and sometimes they're ones that require countermeasures. If we're going to have a sustainable, supportable, domestically supported system of global interaction and cooperation. We know the internet's going to be regulated. 10 years ago, the internet was, a big open global system that we all had access to, and essentially wasn't regulated. There were a few people deciding the protocols and domain name rules and stuff like that, but nobody'd ever heard of them. So kind of didn't matter. And we completely changed the things we discussed before: internet content, fraud, the dark net, terrorism, destructive content, and it sort of goes on, has brought us to the area of data security and privacy, brought us to the area of regulation. And those regulations will be promulgated mainly at the national level, mainly initially in the big players like China and the United States and Europe. If you think of it from a regulatory point of view, it's a unit in this respect. And those regulations are going to be different, which is going to cause fragmentation in the internet, and it has consequences. I mean, for example, data mobility is likely to be highly restricted because that's one of the control mechanisms. Met by highly restricted, I mean, sovereign entities are going to require the data to be physically stored. on the premises, so to speak. And there'll be restrictions on how it gets moved around the world. And that just gets right in the way of all kinds of things like international business, or international platforms. And so we just haven't thought our way kind of through that. But the bottom line is we're going to have to reconstruct a global system that's different in some respects, that tries to keep the benefits of having relatively open trade and investment. It's going to have to deal with digital issues and data and things like that. And it's going to be more complicated and probably more fragmented than any of us anticipated 10 years ago. But that's if this were engineering, that would be an engineering design problem that we've barely gotten started on. And there's a set of questions about which institutions do we have that we can rely on to help us get that job done. And that's also, I think, at this point, an open question. So I think those are the three big challenges are managing the digital transformation, sustainability, or living inside the planetary boundaries, and reconstructing a global system that's reasonably inclusive and creates opportunities without losing its ability to garner support from a wide range of countries.
Okay, thank you very much for this. I think it's quite amazing to have this reconstruction and challenges for new scholar. I think it's making our incoming in the job market very exciting and motivating. So thank you again very much for your speech, for your reflections on the new economic question. It's very valuable for us. It is now the end of the first part of this session, but the second part is about to begin. So we are all invited to join the constellation to discuss important questions. But first, back to the studio.
Thank you, Maëlys. It is clear that with the input from our speaker and with the participation from the young scholars, a ton of great questions have now come up. Our next step is to refine these questions and to choose together which ones we're going to be adding to the digital economy constellation. If you're not already there, you can still join us in the Zoom to enter the discussion. For now, back over to Mes.
Thank you, Heske. Now it's time to look at the questions that received most support, and those were the ones that were commented on by our speaker. And the first question goes, how can digital advantage contribute to our democratic process and coherence of society? That's currently the lead with the 11 likes. And we have another one that was above the that made it to this final part of the question fair session. Will automatization increase unemployment or make it a meaningless problem? And the last one is, how will digital intangible assets be managed vis-a-vis national taxation policies? Now you will be invited to suggest new phrasings. When you look at the question list, you now have the option of suggest a rephrasing for the different questions. Because even good questions can sometimes be made better and be better phrased to be more inclusive, to be more addressing what really matters, to be more pertinent in the situation, and for providing a guideline for further research and collaboration. So let's discuss them one by one and see if we can get some even better phrasings of the questions at hand. And let's start out with how can digital advantage contribute to our democratic processes and the coherence of society? Oh, I gotta add that you can also still like the questions, providing your support for the questions by providing them likes, and you can move your likes between the different phrasings. because when different phrasings come up, then the first phrasing will have the incumbent advance. So for a new phrasing to become the question itself, it's really important, it's necessary that the participant go in and like this new phrasing, and then it will maybe be able to take on the lead and become the question itself. So you can still like, and you can also remove your likes between the different phrasings now. So let's get back to the question that we are currently talking about. How can digital advances contribute to our democratic process and the coherence of society? This is the one we are talking about right now. Don't see any rephrasings yet. This question actually made me think about what could be called some of the broken promises of the digital revolution. I mean, I remember back in the 90s where the history has ended and the Independence Declaration of the Internet was written. I mean, the whole digital revolution was about to democratize everything and emancipate everybody into this new bright future of self-determination, freedom, and humanity. But now it seems that this question, I mean, that we ask this question kind of maybe tell us something about the situation we're in. And now I see a rephrasing suggestion has come up. Yes. How can we safeguard democracy from new digital advances? That's interesting because the first phrasing of the question is asking how these advances can contribute to other advances, so to speak, to democracy and to the good society, you could say. But the next phrasing kind of take as granted that democracy is under threat. And those threat has been posed by those digital advances that just a few years ago was put out to be necessarily democratizing the whole world. And I mean, China was about to be democratized because of the internet. That was 20 years ago. There is an interesting turnover in the tone and in the atmosphere just between these two questions, I believe. And now the more negative phrase question gains a little bit. It has 4 likes now, supported by 4 people, where the first one is to 7, so it's gaining in. How can we safeguard democracy from new digital advances? Maybe beginning in on the first phrasing of the question. If anybody wants to motivate a phrasing suggestion or to get into a discussion on the Zoom call, you can raise your hand and the word will be provided to you. It was only while we were listening to the talk that everybody had to stay muted. Now we can start the discussion if people have something to say. Or we can, of course, also continue rephrasing and remove our likes for the new rephrasings. And now I see that we have a new rephrasing suggestion for the next question. Let's also get that into the game while people are moving likes for the first ones. And the question is this. I'll highlight it. The question is, how will automatization increase unemployment? Will automatization increase unemployment or make it a meaningless problem? Okay, this is the original phrasing, and now we have a new phrasing of this question. What is preferable? 0% unemployment, 100% unemployment? Well, now that's kind of interesting. Wasn't the purpose of all the technological development that one day we shouldn't actually have to work anymore? I mean, I could imagine some people who are still waiting for this, but it seems like that automatization becomes a threat instead of, yeah, we have it. Instead I'm gonna look into the new phrasings coming in here. We have a new phrasing for the first question about the digital advances and the ability to contribute to our democratic process. A new phrasing is, should digital technologies be regulated to serve democracy better? That is a new phrasing of the first question. When we see, and for the second question about unemployment and whether that becomes a meaningless problem in a world of automatization, what will we have to do after the singularity is hit? The first phrasing is still in the lead by all the support. Let's look into the third one that we have been debating and that we can be debating now. Maybe a little bit more hands-on approach question, you could say. How will digital intangible assets be managed vis-a-vis national taxation policies? That is the original phrasing and the only phrasing of this question until now. I just go back and look how it goes with the epic battle of the phrasings according to the democracy question. We now have 6 likes in support of the original phrasing of the question, how digital advances contribute to our democratic process and coherence of society. We have 4, how can we safeguard democracy from digital advances, and 2 on the regulation phrasing version of the question. And now we got another one. Are digital advances a threat or contribution to democracy? And it already got support. So stuff is happening with this first question and the rephrasings. I see here with the unemployment question, we now have another phrasing suggestion too. With the rise of automatization, should policymakers attempt to maintain employment levels or encourage shift to post-work society? The taxation policy question and intangible data management still has the original phrasing, and that seems to hold for now. Actually, I think we have a question that was submitted before this session went on that I think we should put into the game, because it's addressing some of the same problems. And I've just showed it as a topic question here, and I'll highlight it. It addresses a little bit the same thing as the first question about the contribution for democracy. And you can see it now. How can new technologies be employed towards social progress? Which kind of take the whole progress, digital advances into a more positive, you could say, more positive context of how can we actually make this work instead of safeguarding democracy, instead of asking whether it's actually a threat. We can say, okay, this question actually going to how do we make sure that technological advances are also becoming social, democratic, and human advances. If you look at the first formulation of the advances progress question, we still have how can digital advances contribute to our democratic processes and the coherence of society. That's up with the original phrasing of this has the most support still. But actually, as a coming in second and gaining momentum is the phrasing, are digital advances a threat or a contribution to democracy? And now we have a tie. Oh, now we have a new phrasing of this question. Are digital advances a threat or contribution to democracy is now the question itself. All right, let's move on. It seems like the more, what you can call it, the balance question, where we're actually asking whether digital advances are threats or contributions to democracy is the one in the lead now. It seems like the jury is still out on whether the digital advances are actually helping or actually becoming a part of the problem itself. So let's see how that will play out while we progress to the next question about automatization, whether it will increase unemployment or make it a meaningless problem. We still have the original phrasing as the leading one. Will automatization increase employment or make it a meaningless problem? But then on the second place we have, with the rise of automatization, should policymakers attempt to maintain employment levels or encourage a shift to post-work society? That has 4 likes expression of support, while the first one still have 7s, and it is still pretty comfortable in its lead. As for the taxation question, we now have it's still the original incumbent phrasing that is in the lead, how digital intangible assets can be managed vis-a-vis national taxation policies. And then we have this contestant, how can national taxation policies account for the intangible nature of digital assets? All right. Let me see how it goes here. Yes, we still have the digital advances, a threat or contribution to democracy. I think that seems to have been played out now. So now we actually have an open question about how to interpret the digital revolution. Should we go, maybe we can actually ask this question without being too pessimistic or too optimistic. That seems like that's the community verdicts, that we actually should stay open to the question of whether the digital revolution is good news or will end up as bad news. And then for the automatization problem or opportunity about unemployment or the meaningfulness of the problem of unemployment, we still have the original phrasing, will automatization increase unemployment or make it a meaningless problem? That is still the phrasing. And then at the second place, we have with the rise of automatization, should policymakers attempt to maintain employment levels or encourage a shift to post-work society? will we ever be able to stop work? And is that a thing we want? And what do we do when we don't go to work? What are the human activities? How do we realize ourselves if it's not on the labor market? If AI is taking over after the singularity, you'll have to find out. All right. We have an interesting, there's stuff has been happening in the taxation policies. How will this intangible, now let's see what happened here. Now we actually have a contesting from, there's battle ongoing now. Now we actually have the new phrasing battling out with the original phrasing of the question. How will digital intangible asset be managed vis-a-vis national taxation policies? Is battling it out with how can national taxation policies account for the intangible nature of assets? They're shifting right now, so this is where every kind of support counts. Get up, get out there, show your support, make your voice heard, make a difference. You know, it's on, still on. Yes, we actually have in the lead now is the how can national taxation policies account for the intangible natures of digital assets? So now what has actually happened here is now we're having a more, you could say, again, hands-on approach to the question, how can we actually take these intangible assets into account instead of how would this be managed? How can we get into providing maybe accounting principles for actually making this happen at the policy level? And it seems like that this has gained some popularity with this hand-on approach. All right, for this last part of the session that is about to be wrapped up in a bit, then I would like to make it to allow favorites. This means that now you can see to the left hand side of the questions, there's emerged a little star, and then these stars are what you use to make some of the questions your favorite questions. And while the hearts, they're local to each session, they're local to each constellation. To use your hearts, to show your support by providing the likes, then you're deciding on or settling on which questions from this session will go on to the next part of the session, and which will be submitted to the question craft as such, because we can only submit such and such a number of questions. But the stars, on the other hand, those are not relative or localized for the session itself. The stars are global, or you could even say galactical, because the stars you provide are from across all constellations, across all sessions, addressing the plenary, the whole plenary as such, and the 100 questions that will be decided on as the inspiring questions to guide our future research, collaboration, and projects will be the 100 questions that have received most favorite across the whole plenary from all of you. But you will have a limited amount of favorite to provide, and when you have used up all of those, you will get the message that you have to remove a star to provide a new one another place. This will not only be possible inside in the end of the question sessions and as an input talk question session like this one, but this will be open for the plenary. And we'll also get in more into this when we start out open up for question sessions without input talks. But Now I just want to say thank you very, very much. You have been able to provide your stars, and I want to get the word back to the studio and to Thomas. Thank you for participating.
Hi, welcome back. That was a great session. Thank you to Michael Spence. It was super enlightening. And now we're back here in the entire questions graph that you can see behind me. And down in the digital economy constellation, you can see now that all these questions that were just discussed in the session are visible. They're a little bit out of the screen now, though. But if you click into the page, you'll be able to see that all the questions you just discussed are now up in the big graph. And here you can see them coming down there in the left corner. You can see that all these questions that we just discussed with Michael Spence have now been uploaded into the main graph. And over the duration of the plenary, you will see this graph evolve. If you go into a specific constellation, you can now find the individual questions, and where the hearts that we were placing in this session are individual to the session. So you only do that to create the new sessions to be uploaded in the graph. You can now go and place your favorites. The favorites will be placed on your YSI profile, so you can see which one you picked, but that's also how towards the end of the plenary, you'll be able to create a list of 100 questions. So yeah, this is how it's going to work. We're going to keep running in the questions fair with more and more sessions over the whole week as we get closer and closer to the list of 100 questions. For now, we're going to wait 45 minutes, and then we're going to continue in the economic visions constellation with Yanis Varoufakis. See you there.